All right, it is now my absolute pleasure to turn it over to Harrison Assessments and to get us started, Tim Schumm.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. I really appreciate the introduction. HR.com, I appreciate everybody that put this entire two-day event together. I know a lot of work went into this. Thank you, of course, to Harrison Assessments, partner of ours at Lucas James Talent Partners, for sponsoring this specific presentation that Elles and I will be going into. When the partners at Harrison had asked me to speak on the topic of the future of talent acquisition, my mind immediately went to, and I'm a Star Wars guy, I watched Star Wars and Star Trek kind of back in the day, the future 20, 40, 60 years out of the machines and the robots kind of taking over and everything within talent acquisition being automated, and all of us kind of being out on the streets and having to find other occupations and different industries kind of to support. And that probably wouldn't have been a great talk, pretty dark topic for a group of HR practitioners and people practitioners. So what we're going to focus on today is really the current state and really kind of near-term future as it relates to how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected our occupations, our day-to-day, our Monday through Friday as practitioners, as service providers, in order to get the best talent for our organization. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different topics kind of within that lens of what's going on today, how has things changed from maybe a year and a half ago, and what do those playbooks need to look like moving forward with all the different variables that are being thrown at us. To start, myself and my partner Elles are our hosts. I just introduced myself and I'll pass it over to Elles. My name's Tim Schumm. I'm the founder and president of a talent acquisition services firm based out of Chicago. We're an on-demand RPO, Lucas James Talent Partners. I started the business just over 3 years ago. And prior to that, I spent my entire over decade-long corporate career in the traditional recruiting and staffing space at Aerotech, part of Allegis Group. I was a recruiter, salesperson, national sales on large projects for a little bit. And then I ran our Chicagoland market for 3 years before I left. And Lucas James is an on-demand RPO. We have a team of mid-level and senior level recruiters. We don't charge a 20-25% fee per head. We get brought in when HR and people teams need bandwidth on demand. And my team and my group of delivery managers acts as an extension of our clients' teams when they need support. I met Elles. She's actually a partner of ours at Lucas James. Been a great partner kind of over the years. But with further ado, Elles, do you want to give a quick bio and backstory on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Great to see across the country and world here with the locations. I'm in the Chicagoland area, so hi to those in Chicago, too. My name is Elles Skony. As Tim mentioned, I head up the talent and people function at XSELL Technologies. We're an AI tech platform that supports chat sales agents across Fortune 50 and 200 clients. And like Tim mentioned, I work with Lucas James. They are our partner in crime for recruiting. And I am just incredibly passionate about the HR space and glad to be here to share some things and to learn from you all as well. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Elles. Well, let's kind of jump right into it. So first, just kind of high level agenda, some of the topics that we'll talk about today. First, we'll just talk about just kind of macro lens, what happened last year, what effect did that have on the marketplace? What effect did that have on HR people, talent leaders, like everybody that's on the call today? And then what are those future trends that we should be privy to and look at as we change our playbook from the previous playbook to the future playbook? We'll look at the talent attraction philosophy that we kind of need to have in this future state in the post-COVID environment. We'll look at diversity sourcing. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a much broader and larger topic. We're going to specifically target to give some takeaways on how you not fix, but capitalize on the opportunity to create a more diverse and equitable workforce, starting with how you attract those individuals within your talent acquisition function. We'll get into recruitment technology and automation. There's a lot of different cool services, features, functionalities, ATS features that are out there. So we'll kind of talk about how to optimize your talent acquisition function almost through the lens of that we're a manufacturing plant, that we're a factory, and how do we optimize and create automation with our current processes to increase productivity for our teams. And then lastly, Elles is going to be taking us through talent branding in today's digital environment and how we should be thinking about talent branding on the overall landscape of how to attract, develop, and then ultimately retain folks in our workforces. So let's kind of jump right in. So first off, let's just slow down for a second. I think the HR people talent function, I'll put myself in that as a vendor / partner practitioner. It's been a tough 15 months. I don't think the general population realizes what impact the COVID-19 pandemic and all the issues surrounding what happened last year and how we're kind of coming out of it is affecting our day-to-day, Monday through Friday as practitioners. So shout out to all the HR people, talent leaders. Last year specifically was tough. If we look previously to March of 2020, you have to really look at it and think about it when you got into the industry, or if you were just a practitioner between the years of 2011 and 2020, things were good. We were in a bull market. There was record low unemployment, 3%. I have a stat right there. Companies were confident. There was certainty. We're just going to continue to grow. Why? Because we've grown in previous years. The playbooks associated with that certainty and growth got developed over time. We got used to a day-to-day, a process, practices that we would utilize for that current state of a bull market. And then almost overnight, March of 2020, and everyone knows how much this kind of escalated very, very, very quickly for all of us, that certainty went out the window. The certainty for citizens went out the window. The certainty for companies went out the window. The certainty for leaders within those companies kind of went out the window. And we all just needed to adapt to whatever that uncertainty was and how we kind of tackled that. You look at some stats here. We went from record low unemployment, right around 3%, lower in certain industries and certain skill sets, to record high unemployment, 10 to 14%, higher kind of when you're looking at April and May of last year, 30 million Americans on unemployment benefits. Stimulus was pumped into the market. Rates were lower. Companies could borrow more money to pump that money back into the ecosystem to hopefully kind of get us out of an uncertain environment. And we went from just a period of sustained certainty to, again, almost overnight, a period of unsustained certainty. So how did that affect us as HR and talent leaders? And this is where, when I made the comment, I don't think people really understand or appreciate what really y'all went through. We went through a different version of that last year. HR leaders had to mass furlough and lay off their teams. You know, when the CFO and CEO gets in a room and say, hey, we need to start looking at a reduction in force, what areas of our company are, as we view, cost centers, and what areas of our company, hey, we're not doing any recruiting for the foreseeable future, can we cut? And as everybody knows, and hopefully you weren't a part of this, but there was a lot of layoffs within our community last year. So 10-person teams went down to 2, 50-person teams went down to 20. This happened kind of across all industries and across all companies as kind of a nationwide global strategy to kind of adapt to this new uncertain environment. HR leaders, in addition to having to lay off their teams, had more initiatives on their plate. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and right, wrong, or indifferent, last year, especially in the United States, with everything that was going on, is now 10x. The strategy is 10x on everybody's mind, leaders' mind, about how we look at our diverse workforce, how do we attract diverse candidates. This happened across the country all at the same time with every single company in every single industry. The labor market is such that a market, there's supply and demand. And when there's certain things that happen, macro and micro trends throughout our environment, that's going to have a major impact from a talent perspective that we'll get into in the future. Business continuity planning, you're always in meetings. What if we have to do another layoff, another reduction in force? We're now not in an office setting. HR leader, take care of this, build a culture in a remote environment. When are we going back to the office? That's on the HR leader. CARES Act kind of stuff. All this stuff was put on everybody's plate. I would imagine that's tuning into this call. Underappreciated, I think, is an understatement. So our Monday through Friday got jammed up pretty well last year. Playbooks had to get thrown out the window. And we need to come up with different strategies. And this is primarily what this talk is going to be about. So when we look outside of the COVID-19 pandemic and what are results of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then other macro trends that are specifically affecting that supply and demand dynamic within talent acquisition. The first, and this is a big one, the movement away from location-based hiring. Our previous playbooks, not only from 2011 to 2020, 2019, but for decades, talent acquisition was centered around the worksite location and finding candidate pools within a specific 20 maybe mile radius, 25-mile radius on certain skill sets within your worksite location. That completely limited the candidate pool that you had to deal with. And a lot of decisions were made around where are we going to open up our next work site? Where are we going to open up our next regional headquarters? And a lot of planning went into that based on location-based hiring for those skill sets. Now that playbook is completely thrown out the window. Now you as an HR and people practitioner have access to a candidate pool all across the country, as long as you're okay with remote settings for the occupations that those individuals are operating in. On the flip side, and this is where the supply and demand dynamic comes in, now all of your competition in the labor market, other companies that are out there looking for the same skill sets that you are now tapping into your backyard, that backyard that you kind of built relationships with, that you trusted in, and that you were getting qualified candidates from. So that completely changes that dynamic of supply and demand that we need to adapt to in the future environment. The venture capital and private equity industry. We won't go into too much detail here. Just know venture capital companies invest heavily in primarily technology companies and growth phase technology companies. That industry has exploded. There's more dollars out there that are being spent on earlier stage companies and then helping them out throughout the stages, going from startup to IPO and every kind of where in between. Private equity industry, same deal. They're investing a lot of money in companies. Each year from 2010, we're seeing 20 to 30% increases in the amount of money that's being spent. When these companies invest money into the marketplace, where do you think that money goes? Primarily, that's going towards growth. That's going towards salaries. It's causing reactionary hiring events. That's really jacking up the supply and demand dynamic within our industry and our ability to build up candidate pools. There's a skills gap within certain skill areas in certain industries. You have the skilled trades. And if you have a blue collar organization, blue collar workforce, there's a huge supply and demand dynamic between getting a maintenance technician, getting a plumber, getting a trained and certified electrician on staff. Engineering skill set, all those skill sets, you have to create a different playbook around how you're going to adapt and how you're going to find these people in this environment. Software engineering and development, I'll quickly go through these. Cybersecurity, other emerging technologies like crypto and AI and machine learning. These are new. There's not a lot of people that have like a ton of experience with this, right? Are you going to develop a training department in order to help with the skills gap? How are you competing in the marketplace for these skill sets compared to the competition? Are you increasing the supply and demand dynamic and the associated benefits, the associated salaries that you have to kind of put into acquiring this talent? It's never before been like this before, where we have all these different variables that are playing into the supply and demand dynamic and how we need to adapt to that. And then lastly, diversity, equity, inclusion, as I mentioned before, 10x the priority of what it is before. Everybody across all industries across the globe are looking at this. And instead of being a top maybe 10 priority, it's definitely in the top 3. I have conversations daily with customers, with prospects, with partners on what are you doing in this space? How do we do it? We're going to go into a little bit more detail there. And then finally, another macro trend, recruiting is different today. When I started in the industry, not to go back to my heyday, but we still had a fax machine to get resumes from. Like Career Builder had just started, like LinkedIn wasn't even out there, right? You fast forward, there's all these different tools that are out there where if you are adopting them and allocating them to your processes, you're going to be much more better off. You're going to compete a lot better. You're going to get more productivity out of your teams. You're going to develop bigger and better candidate pools for your hiring managers to choose from. And if you're not, that dynamic is going to change very drastically in your ability to perform talent acquisition effectively. All right, so let's talk about talent attraction post-COVID and really the philosophy around, okay, how are we going about this? Tim from Lucas James Talent Partners talked about all these different variables that, yes, I was aware of, but when you think about all the different variables at once and how that's affecting my day-to-day, how that's affecting my team's day-to-day, how do I need to be looking at this to create a strategy to make sure that we're supporting our organizations, our hiring managers are supported, and the candidates have a good experience. I talk to, again, dozens of companies per week with my sales team. And the reason that they're talking to us is because for whatever reason, the customer doesn't have the capability internally. We wouldn't be in business. The staffing industry wouldn't be out there. It's a huge industry if companies could perform this internally. Now, everybody knows the best way to do talent acquisition, the most cost-effective way, the most efficient way from a relationship capital standpoint with your hiring managers, the most efficient way from a candidate experience is to do the function in-house. This is a vendor saying this. If you can perform these functions in-house, if you look at things the right way, you give your team the tools and resources to do this effectively, things are going to go a lot smoother. Your budgets associated with talent acquisition are going to go a lot smoother over time. So the first is planning. I often see talent acquisition as a function take a more reactive lens, right? Especially with what happened last year. We don't have the bandwidth on our teams. The industries and things kind of picked back up, and we were kind of caught off guard by that. So we have a lot more openings. We have limited resources on our team. So we're reactive. There's a job opening here. This hiring manager needs 10 people. This manager needs 10 people. A recruiting team, go support him, go support her, go support them. It's just, it's crazy, this environment that we're in. It's very much a reactive way of looking at things versus a proactive recruitment strategy. But you got to plan for it, right? So what are our year over year metrics? What type of headcount are we looking at this year? What type of headcount are we looking at next year? Reverse engineer that. What does that look like on a quarterly basis? What does that look like on a monthly basis? How many resources do I have on my current team? Can my current team support that? Do I have the right resources on my team to support the different departments? How do I optimize my internal function in order to do this? It all starts with, what's the goal? What's the carrot? What are we shooting for? What am I going to be held to? How many people do we need? And then reverse engineer that even more. What are those specific skill sets? What are those specific candidate pools that I need? And instead of being reactive to all the requirements that are getting on, taking the bull by the horns, putting some planning in place, putting some resource allocation in place, and saying, hey, the planning is basically saying, like, we're always going to have openings for front-end engineers. We're always going to have openings for maintenance technicians at our plants. Do we have a proactive strategy in order to develop those candidate pools before the requirement even comes out, so we can fill that position quicker? We have less reliance on high-cost vendors out there, other high-cost resources, and things just go a lot more smooth. So take a look. Are you doing this in more of an outbound strategy, a push strategy, telling the marketplace about how great your organization is, how great these opportunities are? Do you have talent branding associated with that? So the candidate experience, your close rate increases. But what I see is more of an inbound or kind of a pull strategy. We put up postings. We have our kind of referral stuff that we do with our internal teams, but we're kind of sitting and waiting. We're understaffed. We don't have time to do an outbound sourcing effort. We don't have time to pick up the phone. We don't have time to sit on LinkedIn for days and days and days and source candidates. We see more of an inbound kind of pull strategy that's ultimately just not getting it done. So we're going to go through some tactical short-term and long-term strategies in this presentation on how to bring the power back to your internal teams and make sure that everything is supported across the board. So let's take a little evaluation of what your current engine looks like. So start to look at, how strong is my team? I've been in talent acquisition a long time. I've managed hundreds of recruiters over the years, right? There's a big difference between the best senior recruiter that gives the best candidate experience, that gives the best hiring manager experience, that has a customer service mindset to the hiring manager, that understands all the different nuances of each occupation and each industry and really knows how to close candidates. I mean, they're hard to find. They're hard to develop and train. There's not a lot of them out there. On the other end of the spectrum, we all know the entry-level recruiter, the underperforming recruiter, and then kind of everywhere in between. Always be evaluating, how strong is my team? When we talk about talent acquisition, we may be taking some of the topics that we talk about today and applying it to recruiting for your own teams. So if you can elevate your team and always top grade your team and get 75%, 25% more output based on the current seats that you already have, we should really start looking into that. And then also, what's the structure of the team, right? Like, Do you have a lot of technical requirements? Do you have like technical recruiters and technical resources supporting those recruiters? Do you have non-technical and maybe executive level recruiters? And then from an engine standpoint, are they all full lifecycle recruiters? Are they all taking it from cradle to grave, and you expect them to source and screen and do reference checks and work with the hiring managers and a lot of administrative work and scheduling within the applicant tracking system? Or do you specialize your team? Do you have it broken out by coordinators and sourcers and technology and automation, right? We'll get into this more, but take a look at your current tech stack. Always be evaluating your current tech stack. Research and development in the HR tech space is nuts. I like to pride ourselves that we're a world-class talent acquisition that's always testing out these different tools so our customers don't need to. We're always trying different things out. And there's some really good technologies. There's some really poor ones that really didn't move the needle, but you have to be trying these technologies out. And just look at your current state today. What does that currently look like, and how can we optimize this more? What referral programs do you have internally? What other resources do you have internally? That's another variable. And then what does your vendor and partner strength look like when you look at your current state and you look at your engine? Do you have niche partners that service a niche industry or niche skill set? Because when you did your planning, you know that you always have a certain amount, X amount of cybersecurity engineers that you need on your staff. Do you have that partner that can kind of come in if and when needed? Executive search partners, when those skill sets are a little bit higher level, that's a different recruit than the transactional kind of corporate recruiters or even the mid-level tier. Do you have people on your staff? Or if you don't, you have a partner that you can tap into that really you've built a relationship with, understands your industry, has contacts, understands your business in order to be able to sell it to the best candidate at those higher levels. Do you have the right staffing partner in place? Do you have a bench of maybe contract recruiters that you can bring in when you have bandwidth challenges? Do you always have a bench there so you can avoid some of the staffing companies? And then do you have an RPO company like Lucas James Talent Partners where you need bandwidth and then you can just tap into that resource right away if and when you need it? Always look at your entire engine. Take a step back and go, all right, I've done the planning. When I've done the planning, do I have the right resources, tools, and partners in place in order to hit these goals? Or is my team going to be stressed out and we're going to be 100% reactive as we kind of go through this year? Okay, we're going to switch to diversity, equity, and inclusion future state. Now, this is a very complex, loaded topic. I would imagine if you're joining us today, you've probably listened to podcasts, read a lot of books. You're talking with other practitioners out in the space, building relationships out in the space on how do we get better at this? How do we attract, develop, and retain a diverse workforce depending on whatever our current state is? And specifically for the portion of this talk today, we're just going to keep it specific around the talent piece, the sourcing and building candidate pools of a diverse candidate base. And hopefully have you have some takeaways that you can implement these right away into your strategy, as well as some long-term plays, because it's not a quick fix, that hopefully you can take away and start implementing in your organizations as well. So let's start with the short-term strategies. Again, every conversation I have, it was probably 1 in 20 conversations pre-2020 that we would get asked, hey, we have a strong diversity initiative, and we would like to know how you can help us with that. Probably 1 in 20. Fast forward to April, May, June, now, it's almost every conversation. This is what we're currently doing. Here's our current state. Here's our KPIs. We need help here, right? And I think as we all know, it's a much bigger topic than getting more candidates that are different than the candidates that you brought to the table before in your candidate pool for selection purposes. It's a much, much bigger conversation. So they always ask, how can Lucas James help with that? I immediately turn it back to, what are you currently doing? How is leadership embracing change around this? Are your hiring managers trained on unbiased practices? What does your current workforce look like? What is the retention of your non-diverse and your diverse candidate pool, right? We're not going to be able to fix this for you, right? And you can't look at a recruiter and expect them to fix this for you on their team. But there's short-term strategies that you can implement that could really give you some really strong lift. And if you implement these the right way, you pick your head up 6 months down the road, you're just going to be much more farther down the line. The first is outbound direct sourcing efforts. When we talk about a reactive talent acquisition department, most of the time you don't have time to actively source, sit on LinkedIn, pick up the phone, build relationships with candidate pools, get referrals from candidates. Like when you have a really robust outbound effort going out to the marketplace and screaming from the highest depths about how great your organization is and why these candidates should come in here, oftentimes because of everything we talked about, teams don't have time to do that. We are way behind collectively across the globe in talent acquisition departments on just having enough bandwidth and time for outbound sourcing efforts. This could increase this. You need to make it known within your talent teams that we have goals around this and we're going to stick to this. And hey, like don't bring candidates that all look like the candidates that we've had before. Outbound sourcing efforts and making sure that you either are doing this in-house or you have a partner doing this for you to give you that lift to make sure that you're going outbound. You're not just expecting that a diverse candidate pool is going to come to your LinkedIn post, your career builder post, and you're going to solve it that way. That's kind of step one. The second thing is you have to make it known within your organization. I hate to say that, this very well for some organizations could have been a flavor of the month kind of deal. I take a lot of pride in this in our organization. We're very proudly 74% women and people of color in our 110 person organization. I feel very proud about that. We're helping our organizations with that, but you have to make it known. This isn't like a monthly, this isn't once a month speech. You have to bleed this into every C-level conversation that you have with your C-level leadership. You have to bleed this into every hiring manager conversation, even down to the individual rec level. Hey, we got to make sure we have a diverse candidate pool. You have to make sure you have a diverse selection process. You have to make it known. So with that, what can you implement? Make sure you have incentives to diverse employees on your current teams to refer their connections. That's a really, really, really good place to start. I think it's an underutilized kind of place to start. And that's proven very successful for us. Posting an diverse industry job boards. Like they're out there. If you're just a Monster or Career Builder or ZipRecruiter shop, take the time to research what other job boards are out there for all the different industry groups that's part of your industry, diverse candidate groups, diverse job board groups. Build relationships, start posting there. You have to post in other places. You can't just do the same thing that you were doing before and expect a different result. Removing bias through the interview process. So you could remove bias through the interview process by talking about it with your hiring manager teams. Hey, why didn't you like this candidate? Let's go dig deep on here. Why is this person better than this person? Why are you dinging this person as opposed to this person? Reminder, hey, we're an EEOC compliant organization. There's no bias in the interview process. The other things you can do are more tactical process related things that take the bias out completely. So you can implement blind resumes. So take the name, take the education off if they went to university outside of the US. So there's no bias around that. And we're just looking at experience. Only submitting that to your hiring managers is an X's and O's black and white step to take bias out of the hiring process. Blind screening. Harrison assessments, for example. Are you using assessments or candidate surveys that ask questions that are 100% objective in the survey sense, or using assessments that everybody within the organization, within this department is going through to make sure that there's no bias and you can compare apples to apples and there's no bias in that process whatsoever. Redesigning your competency and bias related questions. We already said that HR leaders don't have time as it is, but taking a look at what the interview questions are per hiring manager, per department, standardizing a process around this. These are just a lot of different tools and tricks and strategies that you can implement tomorrow to take the bias out of the interview process. And then lastly, I actually read an article about this. Put a rule in place, put a 80-20 rule, put a 50-50 rule, whatever. So on your shortlisted candidates, not at the beginning of the process, but maybe the second stage or the third stage or right before the hire, that you require and I know this is going to be hard on your teams in some cases, right? You require a certain metric of diverse candidates before we make the hiring decision. That's going to add steps to it. That's going to maybe delay someone getting hired. Hiring managers maybe need to get on board with that. But it's a very powerful way to execute on this. And then you fast forward after you implement that strategy and the change management associated with that. You pick your head up a year down the road, you're going to be in a much better spot, I guarantee it. Let's talk about some of the long-term strategies. As I mentioned, this isn't just a quick fix. This has to be talked about on a consistent basis, not only with the recruiting department, but everywhere else within the organization. There's other long-term strategies in order to do this. We'll talk about right here. So first is putting a 100% emphasis on your internship or your entry-level hiring around this. It's much more direct to build relationships at historically diverse universities or diverse groups at certain universities, building relationships over time, get involved, go to their meetings, go to a career fair, make sure you grab that group for coffee, check in with them on a month-to-month basis, tell them about your openings. You get a couple candidates from them, send them some flowers or chocolates, build some relationship capital over time, because the groups are out there, right? You just need to change your practices in order to build relationships with these groups so they feel comfortable in order to go to your organization, get the job, start bringing referrals in. So starting at that ground level, that entry level, even with an internship program, is a way to do that. Building relationships with diverse industry groups. Now, there's a lot more out there today than there were 10 years ago when this was a topic, but you have to do the groundwork, do the research, see what's out there, see what makes business sense, see what makes business sense for your objectives around this, and divide and conquer with your team. You take this group, you take this group. We're going to have quarterly check-in meetings with them. We're going to fly out there. We're going to meet with them. All these different long-term strategies to really kind of drive candidate flow over time. So the next meeting you come out of, that they need 100 people. Now you've done sourcing efforts proactively. Now you've built relationships with industry groups. You've already built a cadre of entry-level seniors in university that are kind of coming your way. You can knock out 20 openings just with some of these long-term and short-term strategies that you've implemented. And then lastly,
hey, Tim?
Yes.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Of course.
For 1 second here. I know we were saying we're going to take Q&A at the back end, but we've got a couple in the questions. So here's one that I think is relevant to this long-term strategy. How can a federal contractor diversify hiring when the slots require a high technical background?
How can a federal contractor, when they require a highly technical skill set? Is that kind of the question?
Exactly. Yep.
So federal requirements, I kind of come from the government, and I supported the defense industry. So I know exactly kind of what you're talking about, but this opportunity, this problem that we're thinking is a problem, it's across the industry. It's across the industry, right? It's not even about diversity in some cases. It's about how do we bring in maintenance technicians that aren't even out there. So you have to take a step back, and it might not be just a recruiting conversation. It might be on training and development. How do you upskill current people on your team in order to meet those contract requirements? How do you bring in more junior folks or maybe mid-level folks and train and develop around those certain skill sets in order to meet those requirements? I think, you have to take a holistic approach, and I think you can beef up your recruiting for sure with some of the things that I mentioned. But, at the same time, it's not just a federal contract thing. It's we're all dealing with this. Install front-end engineer, install, maintenance technician. And it's not even a diversity conversation. You might have to think outside the box on how to meet those requirements in other ways outside of just recruiting. But at the same time, a more robust outbound effort from a recruiting standpoint, it's going to move the needle for you as well. Good question. Is there another one, Tracy?
Nope, that's it for now. I just knew you had experience, so I thought I would set there.
Really good question. Keep the questions coming. We want to make sure, we're going to be talking at you for, 45 minutes or so, but I really would like a interactive kind of Q&A. So keep the questions coming, please. And thank you for the individual that had that question. Lastly, just on this topic, a diverse employer brand. I'll tell you a story. This happened 2 weeks ago. There was a staffing company, one of my competitors here in Chicago, and they posted on their LinkedIn profile page, look at our new hires. We had a happy hour, and, look how fun it is to kind of work here. And they got torched. It was like, I'm not even a big Twitter guy, but it was like just Twitter comments, just like on LinkedIn, because everybody in the 20-person picture was white male, hair parted the same way, white female, same kind of clothing and all and everything like that. They got the employer brand from a diversity perspective wrong in that sense. But when you take a step back and look like, what are you currently doing? What are you doing out in your marketplace? And there's a lot of things you can do. And Alice is going to go into a lot more detail around this to tell your story on what makes your organization different. One thing that we're implementing at our organization, we have a diverse workforce. We're doing interviews with a dozen members of the team and talking about various topics around recruitment and what's it like to do here. Like there's certain things that you could project out to the marketplace to make sure that when a diverse candidate pool looks at your organization, they go on LinkedIn, they see the people that are out there, they feel more comfortable coming to you and your organization. They can see themselves there. They can see themselves growing their career there. I don't know. I'm a white male, as everyone can see. I would feel very uncomfortable joining a 1,000-person like all women company. I just would. There's no one in leadership there that looks and feels like me. Can I have that same growth trajectory at the organization? You have to be thinking about how you're projecting out there. And that kind of encompasses all these different strategies that we're doing. Every time you pick up the phone and talk to a candidate, what do? They go online. Every time that one of your recruiters sends an email out, what do? They Google your company. What's out in the marketplace to really kind of project this? So when you do speak with candidates, they actually want to come work for you. This all kind of goes into everything. All right.
Tim, you've opened up, there's two questions here. So this one's two-part. It speaks to what you just said, and I think it's great to talk right before branding. So here's the first part of the question. Is it really possible to have no biases while making a recruitment? That's the first part. The second part is, how could an organization ensure that it attracts the best talent with razor-sharp precision during a recruitment process?
The first one, how can you completely remove bias? That's a really loaded question. And completely removing bias, I think, and if you're going to take that on and you say, my goal is to completely remove bias, I think the reason you ask the question is it's probably going to be hard. It's probably going to be hard. What I would do, and that's just like, you're in a big company, you're dealing with a lot of people. There's people that aren't as passionate about this as you are. They don't see the reasons behind it. Part of me says you got to get those folks out of your organization and then get the median group at a higher level with this. I think the point in saying this is, I think you need to take a step back, look at what you're currently doing, what your current processes are. And if you're missing any of these things that we're talking about, start to implement them, start to do the change management around this. It's always going to be a working conversation. You're never going to get to 100%, right? But if you're moving the needle and you have a continuous improvement mindset in your organization, specifically around this piece in talent acquisition, you're just going to be much better off. And I think that's the goal. Can you repeat the second question?
Yep. How could an organization, and I think you answered part of it, ensure that it attracts the best talent with razor sharp precision during a recruitment process? So I hear a question behind that, the speed, and we're all competing for talent. So the best talent with razor sharp precision during a recruitment process.
The reason that the search industry is even a thing is because it's hard, right? It's hard to do when you're busy and you have a lot of things. But what we do in search and RPO and staffing is it's all very targeted outbound strategies. You have to be projecting what you're doing, your accomplishments, the vision of the company, your benefits out to the organization. So it's a very loaded question. I think the biggest shifts would be to make sure that you have an outbound strategy and be talking about your organization to drum up your candidate pools rather than wait for people to come across your posting that are perfect for your job. You really need to be out there doing it. And then there's all these other things. You need to make sure that they accept the job. This is loaded, right? Is there compensation market rate? Glassdoor reviews. Elles, I don't know if you're going to get into this, but like as an RPO provider, I like working with companies that have really good Glassdoor reviews because our job's a lot easier. If you don't have good Glassdoor reviews, good luck having a precision in your recruitment process, right? There's all these different variables. It's a loaded question, but I think specifically, like, you got to get the outbound efforts. You got to get team members that are going outbound in an environment like this. Thanks for the question.
Yep. Here's one more, maybe before we turn it to the branding piece. It says here, how does your company determine whether a candidate slate that is presented to a hiring manager is diverse?
Can you repeat that? If a candidate's strength?
Yep. How does your company, so I think they're asking for your advice, like what would Lucas James propose? How does your company determine whether a candidate slate that is presented to a hiring manager is diverse?
If a candidate's slate is diverse?
Yep. So I'm thinking your point of don't hire in your own image. You know, how do you know when you're presenting me 3 candidates to hire? How do you determine that it's diverse?
And the first part of that, Tim, was that they don't have race and ethnicity information. So how do you know if you're presenting a diverse slate of candidates if you don't have that information?
Gotcha.
Oh,
gotcha.
Sorry. You're right. Okay, I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, I think
roll up enough. Yeah.
Yeah, we had talked about like put some things in place to make sure that the hiring manager that's ultimately making decision, because we can't tell a hiring manager to hire, like they need to kind of come up with that themselves. If we're putting things in place to remove bias, that doesn't mean that our teams, and we should, like if we're all in talent acquisition, we know if we're getting a diverse candidate pool or not. I encourage all my recruiters to do Zoom screens instead of phone screens. Like there's a ton of different reasons for that, but the reality is you know in a lot of cases, but removing that bias for the hiring manager specifically is how you do that. So just making sure that your job is to build the candidate pool, get the candidate pool excited, present the candidates in an unbiased way, teach and coach the hiring managers to make sure that they're making unbiased decisions for the greater good of the organization. And then, the chips have to fall where they may there, and you just continuously improve and optimize from there. It's a good question. Good question. Let's move on. I want to make sure I get to Elles's portion, and I want to make sure I talk about recruitment technology. So I'll kind of blow through this really quickly. Industrial revolution back in 1800s. Prior to that, work was being done very manually with tools and buckets on wheels, and that's how products got produced and shipped. And then the Industrial Revolution, you added the mechanical layer. So now we had machines that optimize what we were doing. There was more of a machine element than a human element. The humans could spend more time on other things. And then you add the added layer of the internet, software, AI, machine learning. Manufacturing and factories look a lot bit different. The same thing is happening with your talent acquisition department. Think about it as a factory. What do I need human capital for? What are those steps in the process that I for sure need a human for? Talking about the job, talking about the company and the vision and building the relationship and making sure they have a good experience and stuff like that. But also what could be automated. There's a lot of things in a recruiter's day-to-day that could be automated through technology. And I'm going to go through a few of these before handing it over to Elles. So what could be automated today? First, look at your applicant tracking system. There are very robust applicant tracking systems that are very recruiter day-to-day task friendly. Do you have an ATS that's part of the enterprise ERP system that your entire company is using because you have to use it because leadership told you how to use it? Or are you looking at your ATS as a machine that you can use to optimize your team's time and build candidate pools? There's sourcing tools out there. So like AI list building, LinkedIn Recruiter's got a lot of tools. I highly recommend getting the full recruiter seat if you don't have it already. Email and contact information extracting tools, AI Boolean. There's a big difference between good sourcer that just types in buzzwords. There's AI software to basically limit the gap between your average recruiter and your best recruiter. Messaging tools. So you have to have good messaging in an email to attract a response. There's tools out there to present good messaging, outreach automation. I'll let you into a tool that we use, Interseller. building campaigns to reach out to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of candidates with a click of a button that's happening behind the scenes while your human capital is doing other things. Scheduling automation, reference check automation. Look at the factory that you have now. Say, what can humans do? What can we automate? You pick your head up again. I know I keep saying this, 6 or 12 months down the road, you'll be in a much better spot. Elles, let me hand it over to you for talent branding.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, Tim's already touched on a lot of these things, but switching just to the topic of talent branding. And if you're not familiar with, HubSpot has a wonderful open source kind of culture code. This quote and image comes from where culture is to recruiting as product is to marketing. And really, when we talk about talent branding, there's two pieces to it. There's talent brand, employer brand, and then there's recruitment marketing. And so the only way to have a really strong recruitment marketing strategy is to have a really strong employer brand, right? So those are absolutely correlated with each other. So the way that I walked through the slides is really talking about how do you solidify and codify your employer brand to then bring it to that recruitment marketing phase, which is the shout it from the rooftops, you know, get it out on your sites and all of those things. So Tim, if you want to switch to the next slide. Right, so the quote from Shakespeare, though this be madness, yet there is method in it. So there's a lot that comes with the employer brand, and you can hit the next slide. And so from a method perspective, the way that I've used this across a few companies now is really getting solid understanding with your HR team, with your leadership team around kind of these four main areas. So the first one being the employee value proposition, second being your culture code, cultural narratives, and your employee life cycle. And all of those things create the strategy for which you do everything in the HR function and how you communicate with employees and how you communicate externally. So getting really codified there is important. So I'll walk through kind of each of those on the next slides for more information there. So the first one being the employee value proposition. I think I spelled proposition wrong, but that's okay. So employee value proposition. So the EVP answers the question, why would a highly talented person want to come work at my company? Why would a current employee want to stay? So it's important to have a pulse, right? We need to understand exactly why people come to our companies and exactly why people leave our companies, and really get the language down there to understand the story and the pulse of that kind of give and get employment deal, so that as we are, explaining to our candidates why they'd want to work here, we're truly explaining what is real, right? Something that's easy to do is to create an external facing employer brand, which is incredibly attractive and has everything people want, and they step in the door and it doesn't match. And that misalignment causes a lot of, disconnect and turnover and all of those things. So you want to make sure whatever you're putting externally is really what you've defined and found out from an internal perspective. So the next one here, on the next slide, Tim, sorry, being your culture code. And I'm kind of flying through these so we can have some Q&A. So if anyone has questions afterwards, I'm always available. But your culture code here, right? So this talks about part manifesto, part employee handbook. I've grown up in organizations where we don't have an employee handbook. That's very purposeful, but we do have defined norms. We do have our kind of culture code, which says, here's how we act here, right? Here's what's okay. Here's what's not okay. And so this can be a combination of your core values, as well as really defined kind of cultural norms and behaviors that you set an expectation at the beginning of the employee experience, right when people come on board, and you hold, the teams accountable throughout. And I'll show you how that kind of works. But this is the guide to the behavior in the company, right? What you want to see, what leadership condones, what they don't. Yep, you're good. So cultural narratives. This is kind of an in the background thing. I would say most of my employees at previous companies don't know that we do this, but this is an HR strategy, and it's a great way to partner with your marketing team also. You define your cultural narrative. So, for me, I think about it like when an employee, goes home or, logs off if they're already at home and talks to their spouse about their company, like, what do you want them saying, right? What are the things that you think or that you really want to make sure that employees actually feel and talk about? And so, examples here are, my teammates hold themselves and each other accountable to live our culture code, or my teammates make X company a fun place to work. And these are really specific cultural narratives because for the second example, you're not saying my company makes this company a fun place to work, or my HR team makes the company a fun place to work, right? Because we all know how that goes. It is my teammates. And so from an HR strategy and an employer brand perspective, that means you're supporting driving engagement from your team members, right? It means your employees are the ones who are making it fun to work. It doesn't mean HR happy hours are like the end all be all of your culture, right? So these things are really important and intentional to think through as you're then crafting your recruitment marketing, because what can come from this is, you know, my social media posts are really only going to be off of these cultural narratives, right? So that people outside really see and understand our culture, and we're kind of crafting that story really intentionally. And the last one here being the employee experience. So how my team and many teams I've worked with, we look at it from a full employee experience, and we craft our strategies off of this. So, you know, every quarter or biannually, we say, what are we doing within these phases of the employee experience, and how are we creating a great experience? I have employee experience, or this is included as a fourth one, because to Tim's point, right, if someone has a poor experience, it's going to be in your employer brand, right? If someone has a poor experience, it's going to show up on Glassdoor. And so the goal is to create the best experience possible. And you have to be committed to that if you truly want an organic employer brand, right? So this is just a framework I use in terms of, these are examples, right, of programs that fall under those things. But on top of that, really sit down with your HR team and say, or your leadership team and say, at these stages of the employee life cycle, how do we want people to feel, right? So in the onboarding phase, I want that to be an incredibly positive experience. And I want people to really cement the cultural norms. That's our goal in that phase. And then you can really plan out things that tie to that, so you can feel like you're accomplishing those kind of broader experiences, which then lead to really tight employer brands and external things from there. And then at the core of that, right, you have your metrics and your results. So sorry, yeah, you can go to the next one. So this is a framework just from the perspective of, okay, these things are all great. How do you actually do it, right? And so these are kind of four main areas that I just kind of, you know, check our team on, check yourself before you wreck yourself. So you define the culture, right? So you make sure that you've codified with your leadership, with your HR team, those, you know, the core values, cultural narratives, employee value prop, then you communicate it clearly and often, right? So through every stage of that employee life cycle, everything is tied to this language, right? The core values are everywhere, the narratives are under everything, and the employee value prop is showing up or it's not. And then you need to, you know, check it again. And then developing your leadership, right? Your leadership, your managers, they are the make or break success of how you scale, how you grow, and how you're really setting expectations against those behaviors that you've now defined. So really training them, equipping them, and making sure that they have the tools they need to be driving the culture the way that you've decided, you know, that you want to drive it. And then driving the accountability, right? So just making sure the reinforcement is happening. And again, the reason that this is all coming there is because before you scream it from the rooftops, those are the things you want to make sure you focus on and are, you know, and that you can articulate, so that when you scream it from the rooftops, and you can go to the next slide now, when you scream it from the rooftops, you can then practice that recruitment marketing. And on this next slide, I just have kind of overarching like where these things live. But again, it's consistency, right? It's language. It's making sure the cultural narratives are always being thought about. So when you post that thing, you know, and you want to, right, many of the cultural narratives will include, to Tim's point, that you want to be a diverse and inclusive environment, right? How are you showing up in the storytelling that you're doing externally? And that can come across as, you know, your community involvement, the blog posts you have, events you attend, right? But all of these things, all of these articles, content, et cetera, tie back to the employee brand and the talent brand. To make sure that when candidates come in, they already are informed about your culture. They already kind of know the norms, and they're choosing to join. And it's also a good pre-screen, right? People see exactly who you are and they decide to opt out. That's absolutely fine as well. So that's just some of the kind of approach on how we talk about talent brand, and then how we feed that into our recruitment marketing strategy in partnership with our marketing team there.
Well said, Ellis. We all buy things on Amazon, online. You know, we've made that buying decision really through the efforts of the internet. And to Ellis's point, like your brand, your way that you're going out to market, do you have blog posts out there? Do you have articles? Do you have leadership going on podcasts? So when people Google your company, the stuff that you want to come up comes up, and just makes your life a lot easier. So thank you, Ellis. I think we have a couple minutes for questions, maybe, Tracy?
I think we do.
Okay.
I'm checking now. Here's one. What advice would you give to an organization that has always used location-based hiring, but is now moving to remote?
I'll hit this quick, and Ellis, if you have any thoughts. You have to seriously consider your policies when dealing with this current environment. Like if you're like, hey, everyone's back in the office and that occupation can be done remotely, you're going to lose current people and you're going to lose candidates in the process for sure. So I think starting there, and then leadership, maybe you want people in the office because they feel better about productivity that way. Bringing people on board and keeping people, in my opinion, is one of the major drivers of productivity. So I think as leadership, they need to be really looking at that and the policies around that to attract talent, to make sure that you're doing the market rate kind of thing there. Ellis, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing on my mind when you're deciding what to do or when you're going through the change management is just the intentionality behind, if you make a decision to be hybrid or remote, there's a lot of things that go along with that. So being really in tune and intentional around like little things like communication norms, right? Educating leadership on biases that occur in person or virtual. So there's really great, there's amazing tools out there now, especially from the last year, around how HR can set it up so that it is proactively intentional and you're not falling into some of these things that we're seeing where it's difficult. But yeah, individual choice. That's the name of the talent market right now. People want choice and flexibility.
I think that's our cue, right, Rhonda, that we're at the top of the hour.
The Jeopardy music plays.
I actually hit the button a little bit quick, but I absolutely wanted to have time to thank Ellis, to thank Tim, and Tracy. Great job pulling in those questions for folks as we went. Very engaging. I feel like people appreciate that experience. So thank you as well to all of our members for joining us today. This will be archived on hr.com shortly. We will send you an email once it's ready for viewing. Also, the slides will be are on site as well. And then you'll receive an email with your credit information. So thank you so much to Harrison Assessments and to, again, our presenters, Tim and Ellis and Tracy. And take good care, everyone. Stay well.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great day.